Several independent film production companies pop up over the years, and one that experienced some success, at least for a while, was Morgan Creek Entertainment. Named after the classic comedy The Miracle of Morgan's Creek, and founded by James G. Robinson and Joe Roth, they specialized primarily in looking for scripts that the major studios had turned down, partly born out of Roth's own frustrations at developing projects that the studios eventually decided not to make. While the company would quickly sign a deal with 20th Century Fox to distribute some of their films, Morgan Creek handled the production costs entirely themselves and even paid for prints and advertising. So if a movie flopped, that was entirely on them. Their first movie was the western Young Guns, which became a box office hit, starting things off on the right foot. They then followed up with David Cronenberg's critically acclaimed Dead Ringers, which, while not nearly as successful, Morgan Creek still made something back through their deals with international distribution partners. Next came the Blake Edwards comedy Skin Deep, which pulled in solid numbers, and they got a particularly notable win with the baseball movie Major League. The film was equally liked by critics and audiences, proving to be a decent word-of-mouth hit, and has continued to remain a favorite among both baseball players and fans. Morgan Creek also financed Paul Mazursky's acclaimed Oscar-nominated drama Enemies: A Love Story. While they did have a reputation for picking up scripts rejected by the big studios, filmmakers were not immune to the usual executive notes and meddling. Following his success with Hellraiser, Morgan Creek signed a 3-picture deal with Clive Barker. Even though you would think they would know what they were getting into with Barker, they requested the Nightbreed be less violent than Hellraiser. Even then, Morgan Creek executives still thought the movie was too violent, and disappointing test screenings led Barker to remove and reshoot some scenes. He also disagreed with the studio on the marketing choices, feeling they did not understand the movie and were selling it completely wrong. Nightbreed underwhelmed at the box office, and thus studio did not move forward on the other 2 films in his contract. The film would eventually gain a cult following, and several years later the deleted footage was taken and remastered to create Barker's preferred director's cut. A similar deal would affect another horror movie, The Exorcist III. Morgan Creek acquired the rights to William Peter Blatty's novel Legion, as well as the Exorcist franchise, and appointed Blatty to direct the film. While the film's production went by okay, trouble started in post when they requested they change the ending and include an actual exorcism in the movie. The title was also changed from Legion to The Exorcist III purely for commercial reasons. Other scenes were removed, and while Blatty was nonetheless pleased with the finished film, his experience making it resulted in him not directing another movie. While initially received mixed reviews, the reception of The Exorcist III has grown over time, and what was found of the lost footage was eventually edited into a director's cut years later. Curiously, even though Joe Roth had left Morgan Creek to run 20th Century Fox, the distribution partnership ended in 1990, although they would help finance and handle the international release of Michael Mann's The Last of the Mohicans. Morgan Creek signed a new deal with Warner Brothers, and their first film together was Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves. That movie became one of the biggest hits of 1991, as audiences really took to Kevin Costner's American accent in Robin Hood. Morgan Creek even took Michael Kamen's main theme and adopted it as their official fanfare, although that piece of music is probably now more associated with Disney DVDs. Unfortunately, they also produced a few movies that did not seem to connect with viewers, including the science fiction movie Freejack and the comedy Stay Tuned. Morgan Creek would pick up a screenplay titled True Romance, written by young Quentin Tarantino. Tony Scott was hired to direct, and even though Tarantino was highly critical of the changes Oliver Stone had made to his Natural Born Killer script, he was very supportive of the alterations Scott had come up with, including the ending. While True Romance was very well received by critics, it was a box office disappointment, but time has thankfully been kind to the movie. The studio also bought a high-concept comedy script about a wacky, animal-centric detective. After other actors turned down the role, James Robinson became impressed with Jim Carrey's work on In Living Color, and felt he would bring the required manic energy. The result was Ace Ventura: Pet Detective, which defied expectations and was a sleeper hit. Even though critics hated the movie, the target audience of teenage boys loved it, and that's all that mattered. Morgan Creek did not waste any time in getting a sequel off the ground, with the second movie, When Nature Calls, performing even better at the box office. The bad news is that Morgan Creek would enter a period of constant flops after this, resulting in a long string of movies that were widely derided by critics and did not attract many ticket buyers. Among them was the comedy Big Bully, starring Rick Moranis and Tom Arnold, the thriller Diabolique with Sharon Stone and Kathy Bates, the adventure film Wild America, and the Leslie Nielsen spoof Wrongfully Accused. Even the third Major League movie, Back to the Minors, ended that franchise with a whimper. Morgan Creek would also try its hand at animation. Ace Ventura was turned into an animated series, which ran for 3 seasons and even crossed over with the Mask animated series. Their second attempt was when they agreed to produce Rankin Bass's adaptation of the musical The King and I. That movie was widely disliked by critics, did poorly at the box office, and even led the Rodgers and Hammerstein estate to not allow any more animated films based on the pair's classic musicals. One particularly ill-fated decision was signing an agreement with Franchise Pictures to help distribute their films. If you saw my video on the history of Franchise Pictures, you'll know this company was not exactly a successful one, with flops of their own like Battlefield Earth and 3,000 Miles to Graceland. Morgan Creek would end up suing them in 2001, claiming they were owed profits from the whole 9 yards, and that franchise had neglected to meaningfully inform them about projects like Driven, Ballistic, X vs. Sever, and A Sound of Thunder as part of their deal of first refusal. Although considering how those movies turned out, Morgan Creek should be thankful they were not potentially roped into financing them. Thus, their deal with Franchise Pictures ended with David Mamet's Heist. Morgan Creek would attempt to revive the Exorcist franchise with a prequel, and boy did this production become troubled. After original director John Frankenheimer had to drop out for health-related reasons, Paul Schrader stepped in. However, James Robinson and other executives thought the movie was not scary enough. After going back and forth on the edit, they eventually decided to bring in Renny Harlin to completely redo the entire movie. Harlan's version, titled Exorcist the Beginning, was panned by critics and pulled in disappointing numbers at the box office. Thus, there was a demand to see Schrader's version released, with William Peter Blatty being a particularly big champion of this, having enjoyed what Schrader done and hating the beginning. In fact, Morgan Creek very quickly began discussions with Paul Schrader about getting his film released, although they only gave him a little bit of money to finish the movie. Dominion, prequel to The Exorcist, was given a limited theatrical release, and while it was not a big critical success, they did nonetheless appreciate a lot more what he set out to do over what Renny Harlin had put together. These two Exorcist cuts would also mark the end of Morgan Creek's distribution deal with Warner Brothers, and they signed a new agreement with Universal to release their movies. Did this reverse their fortunes? Not really. The closest thing to a profitable film they produced during this period was the Robin Williams comedy Man of the Year, and even that movie's numbers were weak. Robert De Niro's historical drama The Good Shepherd was predicted as a possible Oscar contender, but ended up disappointing, and the comedies Georgia Rule and Sidney White also did not do much business. Morgan Creek would not produce another theatrical film for 4 years after that, with the horror film Dreamhouse. Jim Sheridan did not enjoy directing that movie, as he frequently disagreed with James Robinson on creative choices, and he, along with Daniel Craig and Rachel Weisz, disowned the finished film. They then served as a producer on the 2011 prequel to The Thing, which was also a box office flop and the last film in their deal with Universal. Meanwhile, Morgan Creek has tried to capitalize on some of their movie properties with possible sequels and revivals. One was the reviled, made-for-television sequel Ace Ventura: Pet Detective Jr., which premiered on Cartoon Network in 2009. There was an Exorcist television series that was actually quite well received, but the Fox network cancelled it after only 2 seasons. They also announced development of television shows based on Nightbreed and Stay Tuned, but it's been a few years since the last update. There have also been discussions about a possible new Major League movie, and the studio announced that they made a deal with Amazon to produce a new Ace Ventura movie with the Sonic the Hedgehog writers attached, although the likelihood of that happening depends on Jim Carrey's participation. They did produce the Tupac Shakur biopic All Eyes on Me and a Dead Ringers miniseries starring Rachel Weisz. They also scored a particularly big deal with Universal and Blumhouse for the Exorcist rights. Morgan Creek was paid $400 million with the intention of making a trilogy. The first of these was The Exorcist Believer, directed by David Gordon Green, which was hated by critics. And while it performed okay at the box office, the audience reception was not much better, and Universal likely expected more from it. As a result, it was recently announced that Mike Flanagan was stepping in to direct the next Exorcist film, and will be going a completely different route with the franchise and ignored the last movie. So we'll see how that goes. Another major deal Morgan Creek made was 10 years ago, when they sold the international rights to the library to Revolution Studios. 5 years later, Revolution then partnered with Sony on global rights to the Morgan Creek library. So if you ever wondered why current Blu-ray copies of Ace Ventura have the Sony Pictures logo on them, that's why. As for the company right now, they seem to mostly exist as an engine to exploit that back catalog. Despite their frequent failures, Morgan Creek was able to produce some hits and a few cult favorites, and was willing to take a chance on projects the big studios did not think would have a major audience, and that's certainly something to admire. See you next time.